Hello Internet, my name is Chamomile, I have a GM's Guide, and this is that GM's Guide, but instead of regular, it's on YouTube. Today we're talking about stealth encounters. Now, any encounter should involve the entire party. Encounters take a lot of time, and you don't want someone spending 10 or 15 minutes just playing with their phone while they wait for the story to come back to a thing they can actually do. Which means that if a single PC is scouting out ahead of the group, they should be making a stealth check, not having an entire encounter all to themselves. That's not to say that a PC who decides to sneak alone should magically be able to resolve entire encounters with one die roll, but rather, lone stealth PC should be scouting only a little bit ahead of the rest of the party, while solving entire encounters by sneaking past them should generally be discouraged unless the entire party can participate. Characters who are very bad at stealth may prevent the party from sneaking past encounters completely, but even moderate competence at stealth should be enough if you're running stealth properly. And that's what we're going to get into. See, a stealth encounter revolves around two basic types of enemy, guards and sentries. Now, a guard is someone who can plausibly kill a stealth party, especially if they're sneaking alone, either by themselves or as part of a group. Basically, they are opposition suitable for a combat encounter. A single orc may not pose a challenge to a level 5 party, but if 30 of them are all patrolling in one giant pack, they're dangerous, and they're guards, even at level 5. Guards are usually near blind, with no perception training and an unexceptional wisdom. They'll usually have a passive perception between 9 and maybe 12, which means PCs with stealth training and who are at least level 5 have pretty good odds of sneaking past a guard. Now, a sentry is someone who can plausibly detect a stealthed party. This means they need to have enough perception to keep up with the stealth of at least a ranger who is trained in stealth and has high dexterity, and sometimes even a rogue who will have expertise in stealth along with high dexterity. Now, a sentry isn't necessarily strong enough to pose any kind of serious threat to the party members they detect. Usually a pure sentry is very weak, in fact, weak enough that a party can quickly and easily assassinate them before they can sound an alarm. This is the rogue's forte. Between their sneak attack and their stealth expertise, and especially if they're the assassin archetype, they also get an auto crit. The rogue is the most able to sneak past the sentry long enough to assassinate them so that the rest of the party can pass safely. Now, making a sentry often requires adding the keen hearing and smell trait to a low-level monster. Monsters like wolves or wargs who already have this trait make good sentries automatically. These traits give the monster advantage on checks to do with hearing or smell, which gives them a +5 bonus to their passive perception score. It gives them a big leg up to help balance out what is often a middling wisdom and relatively low proficiency bonus compared to the PCs, who are usually higher levels, since sentries need to be weaker in combat. For example, adding perception training and keen hearing and smell to a goblin turns a passive perception of -1 into +6, high enough to make them a threat to stealth-focused rangers as high as level 5. This takes an ordinary goblin and turns them into a goblin sentry. A ranger of that level would have a +4 dexterity and a +3 proficiency, which is +7, barely higher. So most of the time they'll be able to get past that sentry, but there's a lot of risk involved. This ranger would have no difficulty assassinating that one goblin, though. So the ranger's problem is how to kill the sentry without being detected by that sentry, and without alerting the guards. It may make sense for certain sentries to have something like keen sight instead, or even an entirely original trait, like maybe your bearded devil sentries have learned a special technique that allows them to detect the souls of material plane creatures, and this gives them advantage on detecting them. Just so long as you can find a way to hand out advantage on perception checks to creatures who are significantly weaker than the party and therefore would normally have a pretty poor passive perception compared to them. Now, if you combine the guard and the sentry, you get a sentinel. A sentinel is almost like a wall. They have the high perception of a sentry and the killing power of a guard, and like guards, that killing power might just come from having a bunch of them in one spot. Like if you have a whole pack of 30 goblin sentries in one spot, that turns them into a sentinel because there's enough of them that they can now seriously threaten the party in a fight, as opposed to one goblin sentry with 29 regular goblins. Well, that's a sentry and then a guard pack. Sentinels are too tough to be assassinated before they can summon reinforcements, and too perceptive to be snuck past reliably. They need to be avoided, tricked, or distracted. Adding perception training to any high wisdom monster of a similar CR to the current party will make them a sentinel. For example, an orc ranger might take regular orc stats, but add perception training and a higher wisdom and dexterity, with lower strength to compensate, making him a good level 1 sentinel. If their wisdom is low and it wouldn't make sense to increase it, a sentry trait like keen hearing and smell can be added instead. Now, not every stealth encounter needs a sentinel, and often when seeing a sentinel in the enemy party, a sneaking party will either abandon stealth or leave the encounter completely and try to find an alternate way to their goal. When a sentinel also has good stealth capabilities and they tend to remain hidden, that's a predator. Usually they are not only strong enough to survive the first round of combat and alert nearby guards, but strong enough to serve as a mini-boss fight for the party on their own. Predators can be encountered alone, like they make great wilderness encounters, but they can also work alongside guards. Now finally, there is the officer. The officer thwarts a different approach to stealth than has been discussed so far, social stealth. Now that might sound like this belongs in the video on social encounters, but disguising and deceiving your way past guards has much more in common with sneaking past them than with negotiating their defection. The officer is a sentry but with insight instead of perception, and he can be combined with combat powers or stealth abilities to make officer sentinels or officer predators. All or nothing stealth means that failure is pretty much inevitable. If 6 players roll stealth, one of them is going to roll lower than the passive perception in almost any encounter, even against monsters with a passive perception of just like 10. Even if all of them are stealth trained, all the PCs are stealth trained, and ready to be part of a stealth focused party, failing a stealth check can't result in immediate detection, or otherwise you're basically telling your party that stealth just isn't an option. Instead, every monster whose passive perception beats the stealth roll goes up one level on a spectrum that goes from unsuspecting to suspicious to alerted, and then finally to aware. This serves as sort of a condition track or hit points for stealth. That way, the party, when they fail a stealth roll, they're in more danger than they were before, just like if they had lost a little bit of health, or if they had gained a condition, but they aren't immediately defeated. So an unsuspecting creature might say something like, "Oh god, this job is boring. I hope something exciting happens soon. I don't care what it is." They count as surprised, attack rolls against them have advantage, and this is almost always the default level for creatures on guard duty. You might be tempted to have particularly disciplined or cynical guards be always suspicious, never unsuspecting. But you can't be on that level of alert for more than a couple of hours at a time without getting completely exhausted, even for well-disciplined troops. So unless they are some kind of golem or undead or other untiring defender, a creature is always going to be unsuspecting unless they have some reason to be suspicious. For example, whenever the party attempts to sneak through an area containing an unsuspecting creature, or take some other significant action like stealing something off a wall, opening up a prison cell, something like that, they need to make a stealth roll. And if their stealth roll is below the passive perception of an unsuspecting creature in the area, that creature becomes suspicious. A suspicious creature has an attitude that's more like, "What was that noise?" They still count as surprise, and attack rolls against them still have advantage. Now, if the reason they're suspicious is because the party was sneaking through or taking an action in the area and failed a stealth check, the suspicious creature will immediately make a perception check to try and find them, an active perception check. If they fail that perception check, then the suspicious creature goes back to being unsuspecting. It must have just been the wind. A creature can also become suspicious if they find undeniable evidence that there are intruders in the area. For example, a dead body, or if someone else raises an alarm. At that point, they'll be suspicious and they'll remain suspicious for several hours. Eventually, they'll figure, well, whoever was here, they must be gone by now. And, as mentioned, no one can stay suspicious forever. If a suspicious creature succeeds on a perception check, either because they are actively searching for a creature that made them suspicious, or because you need to sneak through their area or do something in that area, and you fail your stealth check against their passive perception, then they will become alerted. An alerted creature has seen you, but just barely. They saw you ducking around a corner or diving for cover. They don't count as surprise, and attack rolls against them do not have advantage, unless they have advantage from some other source. An alerted creature, unless they're trying to hide themselves, will immediately shout a warning that makes all other creatures in earshot suspicious. The other creatures, if they can't find anything, might come to the conclusion that the creature who alerted them was just seeing things, but the alerted creature themselves will always be suspicious for the next several hours, just as though they had found a dead body. They know you're around here somewhere, they just don't know where. The alerted creature will immediately make a perception check to try and find you, and so will any creature who are made suspicious by the alarm that the alerted creature raised. Now, if an alerted creature succeeds on their perception check and finds you, then they are aware. They know exactly where you are, they have located you. They can make attacks like normal, they can shout the exact location to nearby creatures, and those creatures are alerted and immediately make a perception check to find the sneaker. Any alerted creatures who succeed on their perception checks are aware and initiative is rolled. If creatures are alerted, they don't get to act in the first round. If all aware creatures are killed in the first round of combat, then the alerted creatures will not know exactly where the enemy is, so the party can make a stealth check to avoid detection, unless they've done something that would cause them to be immediately detected, like making a loud noise or running out in the open during the battle. So if some of the enemy are aware, but others are only alerted, then there is a brief chance to quickly kill all the aware enemies and then hide, but you've got to do it in one round, and you've got to do it without doing the kind of thing that would draw attention, that would break stealth. No encounter should be designed in a vacuum, but never is this more true than when approaching from the perspective of the stealth encounter. Sentries and Sentinels and Predators aren't standard monsters. They have special training and sometimes even non-standard traits in order to keep up with Ranger or maybe even Rogue stealth checks. They're unusual and rare, which means the bad guys don't generally have very many of them, so they'll either be posted at important choke points or they'll be on patrol through multiple areas, because the bad guys just don't have enough to put a sentry in every single room, even though they probably do have guards in every single room. That's kind of what a dungeon is. A stealth encounter is more about finding a way past the choke point while dodging the patrols, which means designing the opposition is as much about what other opposition is nearby as it is about what opposition the players are dealing with right now. And, of course, when designing opposition, you need to assign sentries and sentinels and so forth for a stealth encounter, but you also need that encounter to be ready to just fight the player if they decide to approach it head-on. Now, while listening to all that, you might have noticed that it sounds like the kind of thing that would be way easier to reference in written form, and yes, absolutely. The written version of this section in particular is just way better than the video version, so if you ever need to actually run a stealth encounter, rather than simply listening to this video, you should probably crack open the written form of the GM's Guide, which there's a link to in the description of this, and just keep that as a rules reference, except not actually a rules reference, but same basic idea. If you're just listening to this and don't plan on reading it, then hopefully it at least gave you some cool ideas. Anyways, that is stealth encounters. So next time we are going to be talking about chase encounters and maybe social encounters, depending on how long the recording takes. I'll see you there.